Hello and welcome to the Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTB World. Today on our show we'll be talking about a social, rather also a global social issue which then cuts across not one, rather various societies, various cultures and of course various ethnicities too. We'll be talking about the very glaring issue of child marriage, that too in the Pakistani society. We'll be talking about the factors which then lead to child marriage per se, whether it is those which then emanate from poverty per se, or for that matter whether it is those which is then emanating from gender inequality, or for that matter that societal mindset which actually believes that giving children off in marriage, more particularly girls, is equivalent to protecting them. In this regard, we'll also be talking about the laws, more particularly laws passed by various provinces so as to criminalize and penalize child marriage per se, and in this regard we'll also be talking about the level of implementation of these very laws too. In this regard we'll also be shedding light upon the fact that when we do talk about child marriage, how does this practice then in itself emanate upon the child's health, not only physically but also mentally too. Last but not the least, we'll also be shedding light upon the fact that when it comes to the very important role of media, be it electronic media, be it dramas, or for that matter even social media, how can media at one end not only combat but at the other end also perpetuate child marriages per se. All of this today, that too with an extremely diverse panel. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for today's show is Ms. Sabah Sheikh. She is a gender and child rights expert. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Alongside her, I have Ms. Hareem Naqvi. She is a clinical psychologist. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for joining us. And my third panelist for today's show is Ms. Sara Asad. She is a child protection expert. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. And via Zoom, we'll be joined by Professor Dr. Farrukh Zaman, who is a senior gynecologist. Assalamu alaikum sir and welcome to the show. Now before we start the discussion on today's topic, let's have a look at this brief report.
Child marriage is a practice that has been prevalent in Pakistan for various reasons, but steps are being taken to address this issue and create a brighter future for our children. Firstly, reasons for child marriage in Pakistan often include poverty, cultural traditions, and limited access to education. However, the government is working to raise awareness and provide support to families to prevent early marriages. Child marriage has significant impacts on society at large. It perpetuates cycles of poverty and inequality, limits opportunities for education and economic empowerment, and contributes to health problems and population growth. But through education and community engagement, we can break these cycles and build a better future for all. Physically and mentally, child marriage takes a toll on both boys and girls. It often leads to early pregnancies, which can result in health complications for young mothers and their babies. Additionally, it deprives children of their childhood, education, and opportunities for personal development. In response to these challenges, the government of Pakistan has enacted laws to prevent child marriage and protect the rights of children. Recently, a new bill was proposed in Punjab to raise the legal age of marriage to 18 for both boys and girls. This is a significant step towards ending age-related discrimination and ensuring that all children have an equal chance to thrive. With continued efforts from the government, communities and civil society, we can create a future where every child in Pakistan has the opportunity to grow up healthy, educated and empowered to reach their full potential. Together, let's end child marriage and build a brighter tomorrow for our children.
Welcome back. We just saw this report. Now to get the conversation started with you, Sabah. So when we do talk about child marriage, and this is something just mentioned in my introduction as well, that we understand this is a very prevalent global problem at the end of the day. So regardless of the fact whether child marriage is happening in Africa, whether it is happening in Latin America or Pakistan, so to speak, what do you feel as a child rights expert are its most pressing causes?
You see, there are a number of factors which affect child marriage and which lie behind child marriage taking place, and they're interlinked factors, right? So we have cultural factors where a lot of the social norms that we have in Pakistan are very gendered, and then we also talk about factors which are poverty driven. A lot of child marriage emanates from the fact that when families are experiencing extreme poverty, they feel the way to lower this sort of financial burdens, girls is particularly married off.
That's true.
And and so which again affects their education, their affects their ability to sort of pursue other sort of their wishes or dreams that they have. And then another sort of important factor that I think we often sort of don't highlight enough is the prevalence of the informal justice sector that we have, where which is unregulated, and as a result of which, a lot of times when they're settling disputes between parties, child marriage is a sort of a way of resolving.
That's very rightly put by yourself, Sabha, because we have seen when it comes to crisis times, when it comes to conflict times, we have seen cases where girls more particularly are married off. We did see this in the case of Yemen as well. When there was this conflict going on there, more than 2/3 of the Yemen population, the girl population, that too below the age of 18, was married off, on which I would want you to comment further. So when we do talk about this from a psychological viewpoint, what do you feel are the most glaring impacts of child marriages, both on the girl child as well as on the boy child? For some reason or the other, do ignore the boy child here too.
I think one of the major challenge that girl or boy would face in an early marriage is the transition from the childhood to the adulthood. At that point of time, they really take into delivering the responsibilities, managing the responsibilities, maintaining the household responsibilities, because at that point of time, they themselves have not clearly identified themselves.
True.
They have not intellectually developed that much. And also one of the major issue that long term they face is anxiety, depression and isolation.
Isolation is very important, because a lot of times they feel that they are maybe a misfit in the crowd.
Yes.
Because they are kind of an exception to the general norm.
Yes.
That way basically. But I'm sure you must be coming across first hand cases in this regard too. So how do you get to treat people who have been subjected to such forced and early wedlocks?
We definitely have different therapeutic interventions for them, which includes counseling, which includes crisis intervention for them, because whenever somebody comes up to you with the trauma that is because of an early marriage, they definitely are in a vulnerable state where they need crisis intervention, where they need that unconditional positive regard and a non-judgmental environment where they can disclose their struggles.
So true.
And for that, I think trauma-based crisis intervention therapy is the most important thing. And but there is also this barrier for them to reach out to an adult and a professional.
That's so true, because you see there's so much stigma around this as well. Stigma not only accessing healthcare per se, but once you've accessed it, actually to sustain it that way.
Yes, because of the fear of rejection from the community where they belong from.
Right. Because it goes back to the society at large, you see, because this is a social problem. Getting past it would of course mean that we must at a very core level strive towards changing our societal mindsets this way. Madam, coming towards you, and that when we do look at this problem from a nutritional aspect, we also understand the fact both malnutrition as well as food insecurity are causes as well as consequence of child marriages. So how do you in the larger picture see malnutrition actually intersecting with child marriage?
Panelists mentioned how poverty is an issue, and you also highlighted the same, but it's not just that, right? I will come to that, but one of the key statistics is that Pakistan has the 6th highest rate in the world for girl child
that too
marriages,
for the number of girls who are married off before the age of 18.
Exactly. So why is that? Again, poverty is an issue, but also parents feel that their girls are not safe at home, their girls are not safe in the increasing lawlessness and crime related environment. Plus there's a huge lack of opportunities for them. Like if they want to study, the girls want to study, the parents also want their girls to study, but there's no school, there's no access to safe passage to school. And more than that, it's all very, very deeply entrenched, cultural practices. So all these factors lead to early marriage besides poverty, although stems from poverty, but leads to child marriage. And regarding malnutrition, this is such an intergenerational cycle.
True.
So the girl is developing herself in her teens. There's a very set sort of pattern to child marriage, that when she gets married early, they'll immediately, the in-laws and even the parents will have this pressure on the child, on the girl bride to reproduce, because unfortunately that's one of the key marriage being successful.
Right,
How many
basically.
kids you produce and how often you produce
Right.
them.
In addition to that, another angle on which I would want you to deliberate further is the fact that when we do talk about child marriages, more particularly from the viewpoint of child brides, or for that matter bridegrooms being malnourished, we often see that the parents get them married off with that notion they are getting them a burden off their shoulders. What they do not realize is that this can perhaps also lead to malnutrition, or for that matter food insecurity.
Okay, so when a girl child gets married underage and her own emotional, physical and mental needs have not really reached adulthood, and she gets into this cycle of pregnancy, and then we all know health wise that that nature is not going to compromise on the development of the fetus.
Right.
So if the child is not getting enough nutrition, enough iron, enough protein, enough calcium, the mother to be, the fetus is going to get all that nutrition from the bones of the mother. The calcium is going to come from the bones of the mother. The iron is going to come from the blood of the mother. Intergenerational cycle of malnutrition will repeat.
Yes,
and when the
it'll be a
fetus
vicious
is born,
cycle then at the
it's
end
a
of the
vicious
day, of
cycle.
course.
And then so that malnutrition in the mother has taken place, was already in place, has taken place further, then the child's health will get further malnourished.
Adversely
and then
impacted. And you see then again, like Ms. Hareem rightly so mentioned, this also has a very deep psychological impact on your own well-being too. Anvit sir, I'll come to you and I would want you to add to this further. So given your first-hand experience of course being a gynecologist, that too perhaps two, not one, rather various child brides by that yardstick too, what do you feel are the most pressing issues that such child brides then face, more particularly when it comes to their pregnancy, when it comes to their childbirth per se, because a lot of times we see women getting married off below a certain age could possibly lead to various complications with regards to childbirth, with regards to pregnancy. So how would you comment on that?
Actually, you see, if the girls get married at an early age, by that time their systems have not fully developed. Particularly physically, they have certain features which are yet to mature, which are yet to develop, and therefore they are more liable to some of the complications of pregnancy which are peculiar to young adolescent girls. For example, in them, the complications of pregnancy like eclampsia, that's more common. They are more likely to have premature labor, more prone to infections, and because of that, not only their own health deteriorates, but there are adverse effects on the babies as well. Because the babies are born prematurely, they may be of smaller weight, and in them the neonatal death rate is higher, and therefore teenage pregnancies particularly, they have adverse effects on the health of the girl as well as the baby. Secondly, they are also not mature enough usually, and most of them, so that they can take care of the babies very well. So these factors, they contribute to greater mortality all over the world, wherever it is, whether it is developed countries or low and middle income countries. So therefore they are at particular disadvantage.
Sir, because when we do talk about child marriages, we all understand the fact that this is that one grave violation of human rights, which of course not only impacts a girl's, or more for that matter, even a boy child's right to education, but also does away with their progress, their future hopes, their dreams, everything. But moving on, when we do talk about this with regards to the latest trends that you do observe, because you must have in your vast experience come across perhaps not one, rather quite a few child brides. How do you see these trends evolving over a period of time? Because we do see stats which suggest that overall in Pakistan in the last few years we have seen there to be a decline in child marriages.
See, if you look at the prevalence of child marriages, it is particularly more common in certain areas. In South Asia and this part of the world, the trend is now getting towards decreasing the incidence of child marriages, but it is more common in sub-Saharan Africa as well as in Latin America. The incidence in those countries is quite high. So there are multiple factors which contribute towards child marriages, and I would say it is more kind of social norms and the social attitudes of the population which go towards a higher incidence of child marriages. But it was also seen that in countries and in populations where there is lack of education, their child marriages is higher. Similarly, in lower social economic strata, the child marriages are higher. So, number one, it's the social attitude of certain countries, certain regions. Secondly, lack of education and awareness. And thirdly, it is the lower social strata which help towards this high incidence.
Right, sir, your point is noted. On which I'll come to you, Sabha. And I think another thing that I would want to add, and I would want you to add further, is the fact that it's also lack of weak law enforcement too, that way, because you are the only lawyer on the panel today. So overall, when we do talk about Pakistan's legislative framework, how adequately do you feel has it been able to or not been able to address this issue of child marriage?
So let me first briefly talk about the legislative framework that we do have in Pakistan. Is that we, in 1929, we had a Child Marriage Restraint Act, which was enforced all over Pakistan. Over the years, provinces have brought changes within those laws to sort of adapt them to differing times, right? So, you know, so this has mostly happened, like most significant changes have happened 2013 onwards, starting with Sindh, which repealed this 1929 law in the province and introduced a new Child Marriage Restraint Act. And under that law, they increased penalties for those involved in child marriage, and the most significant change was the age for both boys and girls the same.
Right.
Earlier, there was a discrimination in terms of age, where girls could legally enter a marriage at the age of 16, whereas boys, the age was set at 18, right?
True.
So now they've made the age both for boys and girls
There's
at
no
18.
discrimination.
So at least there's some uniformity in age across legislation also.
Right.
Similarly, in 2014, Punjab also brought in a legislation amending the 1929 law. However, the age discrimination still remains in the Punjab law. However, they did increase the penalties, not as high as we have in Sindh, but still we've increased the penalties. And so now, most recently, we've had a new bill which has been tabled in the Punjab Assembly.
That's very rightly put by yourself, Ms. Sabha, because you know we do understand the fact that this has come, of course, pursuant to this very important, rather monumental judgment put forward by the Lahore High Court, which very clearly says that we have to do away with this discrimination, especially when it comes to the age of the girl. So when it comes to the salient feature of the bill, please tell us what all does the bill say and how do you feel it will be the right step in that direction?
So firstly, this law again does away with, this draft bill does away with the age discrimination that we have. So in compliance with the Lahore High Court legislation, which specifically highlighted this discrimination that we have in the law. Of course, moving on, it's also increased the penalties. It's made the law stricter in terms of, so it carries greater deterrent value, where the punishments have increased against, and who can be responsible for child marriage there. The parents and the guardians can be held responsible.
True.
You have the nikah khwans who can be held responsible, and also the nikah registrars. So there are 3 people who can be, of course, including the groom also. If a groom who is above the age of 18 and
who marries a child girl,
it will also be held responsible under the law. So, I mean, the biggest deterrent value for any legislation is the penalties that it imposes. And if you increase penalties, it will create that kind of value to sort of discourage child marriages.
It will create that element of deterrence as we speak.
Exactly.
But then, you know, when we talk about this from a practical viewpoint, because I know you've been working on this for such a long time, one issue which crops up again and again is the fact when it comes to actually filling the nikah nama, or for that matter even registering it, we see that nikah khwans, they perhaps might not enter the right age. That age disclosure is just not there, which could in itself prevent the child marriage per se. We also need to make equally important practical measures so as to not only sensitize but kind of also hold these nikah khwans accountable in the event that they don't comply with the law, because their one step could actually save a child marriage.
You see, even in the existing law, the responsibility is on the nikah khwan and the nikah registrar to make sure that it's not a child marriage. But the good thing that the new draft bill is doing is it's explicitly stating that the nikah khwan has to make sure by checking the documentation, which could be a CNIC educational documents, and he has to attach them with the nikah nama, so that there's complete documentation in this proof that both the boy and the girl were of marriageable age, which is 18 years of age.
Right. So everything is basically foolproof that way.
So, but the thing is, it then it comes down to implementation of
Right.
this.
On which I'll come to you, Ms. Harim, and I would want you to comment on this further. So when we do talk about ensuring that yes, people who are impacted by such forced wedlocks, it's very important that they not only have access to legal aid, and something which you rightly so mentioned, but also in addition to that, they have access to the proper social support services as well, because we have to ensure that yes, they are rehabilitated back into the society. So how do you in that manner propose, can we improve their access to the healthcare system? Because a lot of times we see child marriages, child brides particular, they might be stigmatized for reaching out to psychologists like yourself.
Well, I feel this issue is more common and prevalent in the rural areas. And there's no doubt that there is lack of resources over there. So I feel the most important thing for them to, you know, reach out for help is having an availability of resources, which can be done with the help of the social workers, with help of the policy making, you know, departments and programs, with help of course, mental health professionals who can highlight the effects, the negative impact of early marriages on both boys and girls, and majorly I would say girls, as we've discussed, as both the panelists have discussed, that it affects their education, it affects their physical health because of the early marriages,
Their emotional health,
yes, their emotional
careers,
health,
their future, so much.
yes, which leads to a very common postpartum depression in women, because when they are not able to fulfill the responsibilities, when they are struggling with the responsibilities, it's very difficult for them to be that caregiver for the child, when their own mental health is compromised because of a compromise that they have done with their physical health, a compromise that they have done with their future aspirations. So I think there should be some educative programs, there should be availability of resources for them to
And
reach
also
out.
you see, by that yardstick, perhaps marriage counseling, a lot of times we just consider marriage counseling within the contours of adult marriage. Do you not feel as a clinical psychologist, and this is a practice that we do see happening in other parts of the world too, where particularly people who are younger, they are targeted so as to get such interventions because perhaps they need it more compared to adults?
See, when it comes to an early marriage, it definitely hinders the intellectual development of the child, because they don't get enough knowledge and education to develop the problem solving skills at that early age, to develop that critical thinking aspect, because the brain development, this kind of brain development occurs after your 20s, right, when your prefrontal cortex develop more insight about the problem solving skills. And then it also affects their social development, because it is very limited for them to have social interactions, forming friendships, and develop a support group for them, which
Have
is
that
very
peer
important.
support, which is so important, very, very rightly put by yourself. Madam, on which I want you to comment further, because when we do talk about peer support, I feel it's equally important that we also shed light upon making sure that the parents, the families, they are also sensitized by that yardstick too. So having had that benefit of working in child protection, that too for quite some time, how do you feel can we as a society work towards educating and sensitizing parents? Because a lot of times we see something which Sabha also very rightly so mentioned earlier during the conversation, it is the parents, it is the caregivers who are forcing such wedlocks onto children themselves. So how do we go about tackling this from the parental viewpoint?
I think mass media and the kind of roles, the kind of stereotypical roles that they project, they need to be, you know, neutralized. And not only that, but there's, you know, there've been characters that have been developed across South Asia by organizations like UNICEF for awareness regarding girls, little girls' rights to education and health. For example, the Meena character has been immensely popular. Similarly, so we could have something, we should have something for teen girls, and you know, which does not glorify the institution of marriage for young girls. What we see in dramas, and it's also young girls who are aspiring to be brides, right? So and also highlighting the negative aspects of what actually happens, because which is something that Harim also touched upon.
Basically, all in all, what you mean to say is that the narrative should be such that it just doesn't focus on the issues. It should also be very focused upon putting forward, of course, a very positive narrative of the issue itself, and also solutions thereafter. Basically.
And the impact also.
And the impact.
Because the kind of impact that we see, you know, it's not just the maternal health, it's also the societal impact, and within the household, a teen bride does not have a voice, which maybe, like Harim mentioned, maybe a girl who's, you know, more developed mentally and physically would. And it's also, there's numerous research studies conducted that show that girls' access to healthcare that in pregnancy and otherwise also is limited, more limited,
of course.
than violence against that
She's
child
more
bride.
prone to being abused and of course
Exactly.
subjected to violence. So we definitely need to consider this from not one, rather various viewpoints, on which I'll come to you, sir, and I would want you to add to this further. So when we do talk about this, more particularly from your viewpoint, how do you feel can gynecologists like yourself have more collaborative partnerships with policy makers, with mental health professionals, or for that matter even gender and child rights experts, so as to advocate for and propagate the cause of and of course the impact of child marriages? So what would your view be on this particular issue?
Actually, it's all a matter of education and awareness. And the people who can do that are those who deal with the health of women, gynecologists among them, and other healthcare personnel related to women's healthcare. And it is their responsibility to influence the community, and not only the community, as a matter of fact, policymakers, so that such policies are in practice, which would facilitate people's education and also awareness amongst the community about the adverse effects of child marriages, and also what needs to be done about preventing that and improving the lot of the girls. In this, I think that every opportunity should be taken, and all channels should be utilized, like media, newspapers, stories, etc., dramas, or whatever, those which would influence people's thinking about it. And it is not only the lower social classes that need to be addressed, but all need to be included in that, so that the message goes across, and then all various people, they become vehicles of this message to all the people. And that, in my opinion, is one way by which we can propagate. And this is not only about child marriages, also about gender equality and equity and empowerment of girls and women, as well as family planning and the importance of family planning.
Right, so your point is noted. Sabha, I would want you to add to this further. I think he's very comprehensively, pinpointed towards all the relevant issues that we should be talking about today. So, particularly when we talk about the role of media, and this is something which he also very rightly so mentioned, to what extent do you feel is the Pakistani media today not only giving due screen space, but also putting forward the right narrative? Because we did see in the recent past this very popular drama airing on child marriage. So do you feel this is something perhaps which is then an exception, or is it something which has become perhaps the general rule? Do we see issues like these getting screen space on Pakistani media?
So when we talk about news channels, right? So most of the coverage that they have on child marriage is very event based. There will be one odd case that will be highlighted, and then they will not be consistent reporting on child marriage, right?
That's
so they have
true.
to constantly cover that to create that kind of narrative building. It's really important to really change mindsets. You have to consistently talk about this issue.
True.
Similarly, when we talk about entertainment channels, a lot of our storytelling does revolve around marriage. However, I think that just ends up putting additional pressure on parents to get the children married off, instead of showing stories of empowered, educated individuals who then make informed choices about their own marriage, right?
That's right.
So I think it's really important to tell those kind of stories which are empowering, which promote education. I think more and more we have to talk about the right to education, which is directly linked, and which is as a result of child marriage, that's the first right that gets violated. Right?
So true.
So it's really important to talk about those stories, and I think media has a huge power to change narratives, to change social norms, and I think we really need to, media needs to take more responsibility in sort of presenting those kind of stories, which can really make a positive change as far as child marriage is concerned.
That's very right. In this regard, have better documentaries and films too, because I feel that this is that one area which still needs to be tapped. But when we talk about your particular work, because I do know that you've been very actively working on community awareness too, how easy or difficult is it for people like you who are working in the child rights sector to get through to the average Pakistani person? Because we have come across concerns when people who are actually advocating for rights of women, for rights of children, they perhaps might be shunned away, more particularly in rural and remote areas. So what are the challenges that people like yourself face in the course of course, fighting against social menaces like, child marriage?
You see, the first issue is for people to really come forward and for people to come forward and complain about these issues, right? So when we go into communities and talk about these issues and try to create awareness, the first we have to also, the factors that we initially spoke about in the program, the socio-economic factors which are actually causing child marriage in the first place, we need to address those. So, we need to do both these things simultaneously, unless and until we create like an enabling environment for the change that we're sort of advocating for at the community level to take place. Unless we make those policy level changes, that change it won't translate into any change. And the response normally we do get from communities at large is the fact that, there is poverty, there's no denying that, right? So people they're not enough economic opportunities, they're not enough schools, their transport facilities are limited. So when you hear all these sort of reasons, which are in no way justification for infringing on the rights of a child. However, these are ground realities which we need to address and which at the policy level needs to be sort of looked at and very seriously, so that we can, all laws can have that sort of translate into actual effect.
Right, Sabha, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Ms. Harim, and I would want you to add to this, more so from the viewpoint of course, being a clinical psychologist. So when we do talk about having the right collaborative partnerships between the private sector, between civil society and of course the government, how particularly do you feel can we do just that? Because we do see that in cases more than one, more particularly in the case of Punjab Child Protection Welfare Bureau, there is a very integrated service being provided by this very bureau, which ensures that people do get that access to healthcare, children more particularly, if they do reach out to them.
Well, yes, I feel to eradicate these barriers, the first important thing is education. I feel education institutes can play a major role in this regard. It will help the child himself or herself to break this cycle of arranged marriage. And the second thing, we need to have these parenting support programs, providing enough resources and guidance to the parents and educating them about the negative impacts of an early marriage. And lastly, I think there are a lot of resources now being made available from the government for people. There is some helpline given by NCHR for
basically, and
marriage
also,
problems.
of course, in Punjab we have the Child Protection Welfare Bureau, which provides kind of a very holistic service to people who do reach out to them, whether in terms of legal aid, psychological counselling, or for that matter even shelter.
Yes, but it's important for people to have the awareness, for girls to have the awareness that they can reach out to these resources that have been provided, that have been given to them to seek out help. So I think these are the three important things that can be very helpful in this regard.
Right. Madam, coming towards you, I would want you to comment on this, because we do understand the fact that you have had that real life experience of tackling so many child rights issue cases. So is there one particular case, details of which you would like to share with us? One case of child marriage which left a very lasting impact on you and which gave you that message which today through the show you would want to pass on?
There are many, scores of them actually. Just recently I was in a flood affected community and there was a safe space that had been set up by one of the international NGOs in a remote village of the country. Not naming a village or an area, but it's a snapshot of what I see everywhere, be it KPK, Balochistan, Punjab or Sindh. So there was this girl, she was 16 or 17 and the counselor there at that particular area that I had gone to visit, there were about 40 women there who were sharing their stories, and one of the research tools is collecting case studies and doing focus group discussions. So conversations happen, and they were all pointing to this girl, and there was a mental health expert there also, and they were all pointing to this girl who was barely 16 or 17. She was sharing her story with me that she was 13 when she used to go to school in the village, and she had to the school wasn't really located in her setting, so she had to walk a bit, and she used to go with a couple of other neighbor girls, and there was a group of boys who used to tease them. So when that happened and the parents found out, instead of calling out the boys or taking some steps towards that as a community or at the individual level, they stopped the girl going to school, and they said, this is a matter of honor for us now, so our honor is at stake.
Married off.
Yeah, they immediately got her married off to a boy who was in the family but not really doing anything. she immediately got pregnant. All within a year. She was a mother within a year, and she was a bright girl, and she was there at that particular place because she was coming to seek help for her issues. She looked visibly anemic, visibly depressed.
This is just one case that you're telling us about. There are so many others which perhaps go unreported. This is something that you were earlier talking about as well, Saba. More so from the viewpoint of the boy child as well, because like I earlier mentioned, sometimes the focus is too much on the girl child. Of course, we do know that women, they are perhaps disproportionately impacted by child marriages, but that doesn't mean that we negate the fact that the boy child per se, they are also very adversely impacted as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we can't disregard boys from this whole situation. Initially, when I was talking about informal justice systems, the child marriage is usually, it doesn't necessarily mean it's an underage girl, but it can also be an underage boy. So I think we need to sort of consider boys in this whole sort of narrative and discourse. And when we're talking about advocacy initiatives against child marriage, boys have to be taken into account as much as we're taking girls into account.
Right. On which I'll come to you, Dr. Saab, and I would want you to add to this further. So when we do talk about this from your particular healthcare viewpoint, what are the most pressing challenges that gynecologists like yourself actually come across, that too in the course of treating a child brides per se? Because something that all the panelists have actually deliberated upon, and something that I would want to reiterate, is the fact that at a very basic level, since we do find that legitimacy, that validation for such child marriages in the Pakistani society, would it not be difficult for people like yourself to treat such children?
In my opinion, that people who are, as you said, senior gynecologists, they do not come across these challenges so often because their practices and their involvement is more in towards teaching or in dealing with more complicated cases. But so far as policy making is concerned, so far as training of the other health professionals is concerned, I think gynecologists and senior people have an important role to play in that. And they can influence a lot by their opinions, by propagation of their opinions, to influence the prevailing environment and circumstances to make them conducive for practices of family planning, for creating awareness about gender equality, and also about the perceived notions of particularly the male, as we have male-dominated society, to also tell that there is a need for creating greater respectful environment for women. So that those are the things which are important, and practically gynecologists do have certain constraints, that their sphere of work is comparatively limited, and they may not have the opportunity of getting in touch with the masses. Because 50% now, because of urbanization, 50% of our population is in the rural areas, and there is a comparative lack of healthcare facility over there, lack of awareness and all that. But those need to be addressed, and there needs to be formulate a concerted effort towards this.
All in all, then again, of course, this goes back to the basics, which is, of course, the fact that we do at a very basic level need to take men and boys along with us in this fight against early, forced and child marriages. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Saba, and before we conclude today's show. So how would you wrap up today's conversation, especially when it comes to putting forward new proposals for not only law reform in the area of child marriage, but also in terms of strengthening our institutions so that they are in a better position so as to look out for such social evils too?
So to eliminate child marriages, I think we need to target union councils first of all. There has to be proper training of the representatives at the union council who are responsible for registering marriages. So which means the nikah registrars. There is no formal process which has been defined in the law through which they select these nikah registrars. It's left to the discretion of the union council. So the selection process of the nikah registrars also has to be clearly defined. Secondly, they have to be regularly trained on the law so that they're following the process that has been prescribed in terms of registering marriages.
Which is extremely important.
So they have to make sure the nikah namas which are being issued, they are not loose paper nikah namas which are available outside of union council. The union councils have to make sure that nikah namas are only available with them. That's probably the biggest reason where there are lots of unregistered unregistered marriages taking place, and which are very easily where you manipulate the age when you're just getting nikah namas and you're getting younger children married off without any sense of accountability, because there's no system that's going to check
Of
that.
course.
And again, there has to be regular accountability of the union councils also, where they should ideally submit monthly reports of like the documentation and the number of nikahs that have been registered during the course of the month.
Right.
So I think that's really important for
Right.
union councils to do.
Basically,
So,
and then when it comes to capacity building, Sabha, do you not feel here that that is also another area that we need to invest in? Capacity building not only of the parties per se, of the bride and the bridegroom, but also of nikah khawans, like you very rightly so mentioned, but also in the event that it does end up in court or in the police stations there onwards, also of the police officials at the end of the day, and later on in with the judges as well.
yeah, and like we initially said, I mean, there's a lot of social acceptability of child marriages, and that's that mindset prevails through law enforcement officials also, right? So it's not just a social issue; it just prevails amongst the judges also, amongst the police also. So I think that mindset has to be done away with. I guess what is going to really help is that if the bill that has currently been introduced in the Punjab Assembly, if that gets implemented in Punjab, it will certainly elevate the standard which we're trying to achieve.
And of course,
yeah. I also want to add that since we're talking about provincial legislation, you know, there have been a number of sort of attempts in KP and Balochistan also in terms of amending the domestic legislation. However, there have been unsuccessful attempts, and so far they're still following the 1929 legislation, which again imposes very low sort of penalties for this, and it sort of discriminates between the ages of boys and girls also. And we also need to highlight that we have the personal laws for non-Muslims are also, they have their own personal laws in Pakistan, right? And when we talk about eradication of child marriages, we also need to look at the laws of non-Muslims. And for example, in the Christian Marriage Act, the age for marriage for girls is 13 years, as low as 13 years, and for boys it's 16 years. So when we're advocating, I think we also need to advocate for changes in the personal laws of non-Muslims.
That's very right. And when we are talking about this, we need to look at this from a more holistic viewpoint.
Absolutely.
Right, madam, your point is noted. Coming towards you, Harim, so when it comes to young people giving their due contribution so as to do away with social evils like these, how particularly do you feel can young people do just that? We have seen young people very actively propagate and advocate for issues like climate justice, and that too not only in Pakistan, rather world over. I think Greta Thunberg is the perfect example that we do have in front of us. But in Pakistan, how do you feel can young people play their part in combating child marriage?
Well, I feel when it comes to young people, they are the most available at social media these days. So I feel social media is the biggest platform for them, and they should use it for educating people, and there should be more educating content over there, and talking about these topics, and also developing a support group for people around them. And we need to have more informative content, just like you having a show and always raising these topics and giving more educative knowledge to people about these things.
Right, and also by that yardstick, something that I would want to add is also giving accurate information, because you see this prevalent issue of fake news, of misinformation, disinformation, that is also in itself such a big danger. So we have to ensure that social media is kind of educational, it's informative, but at the same time it is not something which then kind of attacks on the core fabric of the Pakistani society too. Coming towards you, madam, and before we conclude today's show, so all in all, when it comes to wrapping up today's conversation, what would be your one message when it comes to doing away with practices like these? What are the changes that we as a Pakistani society need to make in our societal mindsets, in our attitudes, so as to generally discourage such wedlocks?
We need to propagate and get through to parents the idea that getting their girls married off early as a teen when they're growing themselves is not going to solve all their problems. It's going to add to them health-wise, financially, and the population burden that the country is already facing. So, and economically, in terms of access to health, access to food security, all these issues are going to be propagated further and manifold if we do not, as stakeholders, as teachers, educators, policy makers, media, the legal aspect of it, we need to really get this point across that it's not going to solve anything.
It's very rightly put by yourself, and then of course these efforts, they need to be very consolidated, they need to be very long term, and they of course need to be very sustained too. Right, madam, your point is noted. Sir, coming towards you, and before we conclude today's show, what would be your last concluding comment when it comes to wrapping up today's show, given your vast experience of course being a medical healthcare professional? How do you feel can parents in communities then actively strive towards delaying marriage, at least to a level where children, more particularly girls, they are not only ready for it, but also they are ready for parenthood per se? How do you feel can education be that one tool which can actually help us break free from these shackles of child marriage?
Important aspect is education of the girls. Obviously, I'm not saying education of the girls only, or education of the boys too, but since girls are given kind of second seat so far as education and other privileges are concerned, to make up for some of the deficiencies and to improve the standard of living of girls and giving them greater empowerment, I think education is number one. Number two, we need to work on gender equality and gender equity. Number three, it needs to be emphasized that girls should be married later, and because of the health effects, by that time they'll be in a better position to play a greater role. A woman's role in the family is that of a nucleus, and she impacts the outcome of the family, education of the children, how the household runs, etc., etc. And therefore, it is important that they should be mentally mature, they should be reasonably educated so that they can carry out these functions admirably. And again, once again, why education is so important? Because it provides them that empowerment which can be translated into economic improvement, and also then they'll ultimately be having a greater say in the family affairs, and about the size of the family, about the health of the family, about education, etc. So that will not only be an improvement within the family nucleus, but also for the community.
When we do talk about child marriages, this is something which just doesn't impact the child particularly, it does in the larger picture also impact the society at large. On which note I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Ms. Sabha. Thank you so much, Ms. Hareem. Thank you so much, madam. And thank you so much, sir, for your precious time today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about the very pervasive issue of child marriage as it does exist in the Pakistani society. In this regard, we also spoke about the most imminent and of course the most pressing causes of this very social evil too. In this regard, we spoke about not one, rather various laws and of course policies which do exist in Pakistan so as to not only criminalize it, but also in ways more than one to also prevent it. The question at the end of the day remains, which is that we as a society, if we want to do away with child marriage, need to seriously focus upon, implementing laws which actually criminalize it and penalize it. And then in addition to that, we also need to then of course focus upon, having the necessary community engagement to actually educate and sensitize masses about such practices, and of course last but not the least, also to ensure survivors of child marriage due and of course comprehensive support by that yardstick too. Child marriage is that one practice which not only robs children of their very basic right to education and of course their due hopes, their dreams and their future, but is also of course that one practice which actually very negatively impacts on a society at large too. Thank you for watching The Society. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.